You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. We have a jam-packed with information show for you today with a lot of deep dirt on right-wing religionists following up. So get out your pencils. You might want to take note of some of that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in the preamble because we've got so much to get to. But I will say that we are going to do fighting words, and we will have Inside the Headlines with this story. And my special guest for today is a wonderful writer and a wonderful investigative journalist, Katherine Stewart. So, that all said, now let's get right to it, which means we have to go inside the headlines. That venerable newspaper, The Washington Post, winner of many Pulitzer Prizes and birthplace of the great coverage by Woodward and Bernstein on the Watergate scandal, All the President's Men, The Washington Post, which blossomed to rival even the New York Times under the great publisher Kay Graham, she who rose to the occasion and took over from her husband. The Washington Post, which survived only to be bought in a fairly short time by Jeff Bezos. Yes, he of Amazon notoriety. Everyone was repeatedly assured and reassured that there would be no changes at the Post, and its integrity would remain untouched, or so it seemed, even after Kay Graham's tenure ended for a few years, until now. At first, all we heard was that Sally Busby, the editor, had resigned abruptly. Well, put a pin in that, as they say, for a moment. Now it turns out that the Washington Post publisher, the new one, and the incoming new editor assigned work based on stolen phone records, according to a former reporter and a major New York Times piece by Justin Scheck and Joe Becker, reporting from London and quoted at length here. This is dated June 15th. When they worked as journalists in London 2 decades ago, the publisher and the incoming editor of the Washington Post used fraudulently obtained phone and company records in newspaper articles, according to a former colleague, a published account of a private investigator, and an analysis of newspaper archives. Will Lewis, the Post's publisher, assigned one of the articles in 2004 as business editor of the Sunday Times. Another was written by Robert Winnett, whom Mr. Lewis recently announced as the Post's, Washington Post's, next executive editor, replacing Busby. The use of deception, hacking, and fraud is at the heart of a long-running British newspaper scandal, one that toppled a major tabloid in 2010 and led to years of lawsuits by celebrities who said that reporters improperly obtained their personal documents and voicemail messages. Lewis has maintained that his only involvement in the controversy was helping to root out problematic behavior after the fact, while working for, wait for this, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation. But a former Sunday Times reporter said on Friday that Mr. Lewis had personally assigned him to write an article in 2004 using phone records that the reporter understood to have been obtained through hacking. Well, after that story broke, a British businessman who was the subject of the article said publicly that his records had been stolen. The reporter, Peter Koenig, described Lewis as a talented editor, one of the best he'd ever worked with. But as time went on, he said, Lewis changed. Quote, his ambition outran his ethics, Koenig said. A second article in 2002 carried Winnett's byline, and a private investigator who worked for the Sunday Times later publicly acknowledged using deception to land the materials. A New York Times review of Mr. Lewis's career also raised new questions about his decision in 2009 as editor of the Daily Telegraph in Britain to pay more than £100,000 for information from a source. Paying for information is prohibited in most American newsrooms. In a meeting with Post journalists in November, Lewis defended the payment, saying that the money had been put into an escrow account to protect a source. But the consultant who brokered the deal said in a recent interview that there had been no escrow account and that he had doled out the money to sources himself. Lewis declined to answer a list of questions. The paper has previously said, quote, "William is very clear about the lines that should not be crossed." In a series of discussions with Post journalists this week, Lewis has said that as publisher, his role is to create an environment where great journalism can flourish and that he will never interfere. Winnet did not answer phone calls or respond to questions sent by email and WhatsApp. The Post referred questions to his spokesman or spokeswoman, who did not respond. Sally Busby's abrupt departure from the Washington Post, where she had been editor since 2021, has added to the growing tension between the newsroom and its chief executive, Will Lewis, who was hired by Jeff Bezos to help turn the business around. After Busby's unexpected resignation and reports that Lewis objected to coverage of a news story involving him, leaders at the Post tried to reassure the staff. Lewis repeatedly offered an exclusive interview to an NPR reporter, by the way, if the reporter agreed not to write about allegations against him in a British phone hacking scandal, according to an account by that reporter. Lewis praised Winnet this month in a meeting with Post journalists. "He is a brilliant investigative journalist," Lewis said, "and he will restore an even greater degree of investigative rigor to our organization." Together, Lewis and Winnet will lead one of the most important news organizations in the United States, one that has a deep history of providing independent checks on governments and holding the powerful accountable. And newsroom upheaval in the run-up to an election. Well, amid that, journalists inside and outside the Post have asked whether the new leaders share their ethical foundation. Lewis was publisher of the Wall Street Journal from 2014 to 2020. Although the paper maintained its reputation for high journalistic standards and won Pulitzers, including for revealing hush money payments by Trump before the 2016 election, turmoil at the Post has brought new scrutiny to his early career, particularly at the Sunday Times. And all I can tell you is that, well, there's a lot more detail in their coverage and in the coverage of the New York Times. But it's important to understand that Bezos has made a decision not to stay out of it, that he is going to reshape the Post and underscore the central role he will play at the paper he bought for $250 million more than 10 years ago. He spends more time these days on other projects, including his space company, Blue Origin, and he leaves the day-to-day operations and editorial strategy to the chief executive and top editors. But he is ultimately, the Times says, the Post's most important figure. He has picked its chief executives. He has set the agenda for its business. He approves the budget. He advises the newspaper on business matters through regular phone calls with the chief executive and occasional meetings with its leadership team. Whereas Miss Busby joined the Post in 2021 after serving as executive editor of the Associated Press, where she spent her whole career. She took over the Post from Marty Baron, a legendary newspaper editor who had run the Post for 8 years and oversaw its transition to ownership by Jeff Bezos, the Amazon founder. Ms. Busby, 58, had steered the newspaper for the last 3 years, a turbulent period that resulted in award-winning journalism but also a drop in audience. Well, the story goes on and is more detailed as it does, but it's undeniable that the sticky toffee pudding smeared fingers of new folks in power at the Washington Post have a serious legitimacy problem. For one, I'm canceling my subscription and clinging for dear life now to the New York Times, when a once independent institution that is a member of the supposedly free press is now not only owned by, according to some people, the richest man in the world, Bezos. When its top editors more and more come from the business world, the Wall Street Journal, or even the British tabloid press, infamous for their dirty tactics. Well, you know, when it writes like a duck and acts like a duck, you can damn well bet it's a duck. We have to take a short break here, but I'll be back directly with Katherine Stewart. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for today's conversation is Katherine Stewart, who is an American journalist and author, and she's been covering religious nationalism and its assault on American democracy for over 15 years. Her latest book, The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, was awarded first place for excellence in nonfiction books by the Religion News Association, as well as a Morris D. Forkosh Award. Her previous book, The Good News Club: The Christian Right's Stealth Assault on America's Children, covered the religious right's efforts to infiltrate and undermine public education. She writes for the New York Times Opinion, New Republic, and many others, and has appeared on CNN, MSNBC, and NPR. In 2020, The Power Worshippers was acquired by producers Rob Reiner and Michelle Reiner, who subsequently based their documentary feature film, God and Country, on the book. Stewart's forthcoming book will be published by Bloomsbury in January of 2025. You can follow her on Twitter at Kath Stewart with 2 S's. And here she is. Fasten your seatbelts. Buckle 'em tight. Katherine, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm so pleased that you're here. And you've written a really remarkable book, a quite wonderful book, The Power Worshippers: Inside, inside, folks, the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism, by Katherine Stewart, who is also the author of The Good News Club, which was about the rise of religious nationalism's effect on education, I believe. This is about the powers that be behind the scenes. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Robin. I'm just thrilled to be speaking with you today.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're here. I tell you, Katherine, your book was so riveting that it also reminded me of a remarkable piece that I had read a few years ago and built an entire program around because I was so impressed by it. I cited the author and I quoted from the piece, and then I went on talking about the subject. And I wanted to, pull that out of the files to mention that to you. And when I found it was by you. And so it was a piece on the Museum of the Holy Bible, the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. and right a block from the White House, and Drollinger and the people who run it, and the DeVos family, and all those high-powered connections who hold weekly prayer meetings, or did, in the Trump regime, uh, for people like Mike Pompeo and Betsy DeVos and Jeff Sessions when he was still AG, and Mike Pence, and it curled my hair and straightened it all in one motion. I mean, so I was going to cite that to you and say, listen, this is a wonderful piece by this other author in the Times, but you did it. So thank you for that, too.
Well, thank you. I've been covering this movement for over 15 years. And, I've seen that what we once referred to as the religious right really isn't on the fringes of American life anymore. It's really at the center of the Republican Party. To be honest, seems like the guardrails of the Republican Party have fallen away, and it's really this extremists who are leading this movement that are setting the agenda. Look, I think the thing to remember is that Trump is where he is, and the authoritarian movement is where it is because of Christian nationalism. So it's really the leaders of this densely connected network of what used to be called the religious right, the activists, the strategists, the sort of most powerful pastors that are really calling the shots here.
Yeah, the ordinary folks don't know, or or don't care, or they may be acting out of some misguided, genuine, I don't know what, faith or something, but it's at least genuine. They are not the cynical, manipulative power worshippers, real power worshippers that these people at the very top are.
That's true. I think when you're looking at this movement, it's really helpful to distinguish between the leaders of the movement and the rank and file. And when you're talking about the rank and file, you're talking about a very wide range of people, many of whom are evangelical, but many of whom are not.
Yes.
The movement includes a very substantial number of non-evangelical members of the rank and file. And they have a wide range of concerns and interests and backgrounds. And so when they're casting their vote, say, to end abortion, or they think they're protecting the American family, they're really not arguing for major changes in the way our government is run necessarily. They're sort of making a statement about themselves and what they value in themselves. So for them, it's really all about, frankly, identity politics. For a lot of them. But it's the leaders of this movement who are really setting the agenda. And what they want is often very different from what the rank and file want. They want more power for themselves. They want access to public money, obviously. They want to serve the interests of their donors. They've these cadre. The movement would be nowhere without a cadre of very rich donors who want low taxes for the rich, minimal regulation of business, no regulation for the environment, and things like that. And so the irony here is that you have a lot of members of the rank and file. They really buy the line that they're protecting family values.
I know.
But the leaders of the movement are driving support for politicians whose policies are frankly making it so much harder for American families to succeed, because they're eroding rights for the workforce. They're eroding the rights of families to make their own reproductive decisions.
That's
and
right.
They're eroding rights, for fair wages and things like that.
Well, I was
intensifying inequalities of income inequality.
Exactly. No, and I was thinking that those very people that you're talking about, ordinary folks, would be horrified if somebody would say to them, well, most people shouldn't vote. We don't want them to vote. They would think that's not good.
That's true.
But yet, I go back to Paul Weyrich, who I go back to the days of Richard Viguerie and his stamp campaign, but his direct mail campaign. But Weyrich, or Weyrich, I never knew how he was pronounced, has called for a constitutional convention in hopes of producing a form of government more congenial to his beliefs. And he's the one who said, I don't want everybody to vote. In public, he said this in 1980, when, as a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections quite candidly goes up as the voting populace goes down. I mean, that's not my friend. That's not the friend of those ordinary folks who, whether they're strict evangelicals or flirting with it or just, deeply into family values. That's not one of the things that they're interested into. Nor this whole circle that you go into in even greater detail, a fascinating detail in the book, of the DeVos and Prince families. My God, there's a whole thing of their having. Drollinger had these weekly prayer meetings in the White House, in the Trump White House. The irony being that Trump is proudly the greatest offender, sinner, everything that you could possibly name, that you can think of. 3 times divorced. I mean, prostituted women, porn star, you name it. He's done it, as well as the non women oriented things. So but it's incredible because these were attended by Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo and all these folks. That's real power. They had influence on real power, and they continue to. So
I know, it's a sad fact, but we have to accept that Trump's criminal level of sexual abuse, his in-the-face misogyny, his sexism, and frankly, he's a convicted felon, and he's got a number of very credible charges pending, felony charges pending. And these things will actually help more than hurt his position with some parts of his base. And that's because Christian nationalism is hugely dependent on reactionary attitudes toward gender roles, toward the submission of women, and these virtues of a certain macho model of manliness.
Yeah.
He really embodies that. So for them, it's part of his strongman appeal. Anything they don't really like, they can say they have the, forgiveness of sin and redemption. But at a lot of events that I have attended where Trump appears, he says, when they go after me, they're going after you. So he's managed to
I am your retribution. That's right. Damn right.
Right. I am your retribution.
Terrifying.
So it's really very sad. But it shows us where the movement is today, that they could actually stand behind a felon, a convicted felon.
And they're right on the cusp of openly, blatantly denying anything about their supposed Christianity or its background. I mean, in other words, who was it? Was it Falwell? You'll know, of course. Who said when Christ comes again, he's going to come with an AK-47, not a whip. I mean, the idea of Christ wielding an AK-47. I'm an atheist; doesn't bother me one way or the other. But God, what are they thinking? What is in their
Christian nationalism? It's not merely the idea of America as a Christian theocracy or a Christian nation whose laws should be based on a reactionary reading of the Bible. It's really, I would say, more than anything, a political movement, a movement that's exploiting religion in its organized quest for power. When we look at the faith aspect of it, many of the most forceful opponents of Christian nationalism are themselves religious and Christian. I think about groups like the Baptist Joint Committee and Faithful America and the New Evangelicals, and so many.
We don't hear that much of them, though. We don't hear.
Oh, they're making as much noise as they possibly can. But the religious left is not the equivalent of the religious right because they don't have the money. They don't have the infrastructure. I mean, the amounts of money that flow through this organization are absolutely unbelievable.
Stupefying.
There's a real money machine that has been building up the infrastructure, the sort of organizational infrastructure of this movement over decades. Now, some of this money comes through churches and into religious and political organizations through tithing
and tax
small
exempt.
donations.
And tax exempt.
But the most influential piece of the pie really comes from a small number of plutocratic donors, like people like the DeVos Prince family that you mentioned earlier, or you think about the Wilkes brothers in Texas. They're born-again fracking billionaires who like to drop money bombs on culture war issues. Then you have people who aren't even themselves Christian and actually, frankly, seem quite atheistic. I think about a guy like Barry Side. He's a Chicago billionaire who is Jewish, who gave the largest single donation in political history to create something called the Marble Freedom Trust. And he put Leonard Leo in charge of it. Leonard Leo is former head of the Federal Society.
He's in everything. He is in everything. Exactly. He is the glue in everything. Yeah, he chooses our justices. He is consulted by everybody. Everybody snaps too when his name is mentioned. He's terrifying.
That's true. And a lot of people call this movement an evangelical movement, but it's really not. I mean, there are also a cadre of very rich, ultra-conservative Catholic donors like Sean Filer and Timothy Bush, and they help fund these extreme right-wing think tanks and media for the sort of, I would say, ultra-conservative Catholic side of the Christian nationalist movement. I mean, these folks are classic oligarchs. They really believe that they and their fellow billionaires are destined to rule. Some of them say they think their money comes from God. And they have a tremendous fear of democracy, a tremendous fear of non-religious people and religious progressives or people who interpret the faith to pursue social justice agendas, a more equal form of the faith. And frankly, they've been instrumental in shaping Christian nationalism into the anti-democratic, pro-oligarchic force that it is today.
One of the things I wanted to ask you was, where does it come from, and how, maybe this is not answerable, just because you've spent more than a lifetime involved in this. I don't expect you to answer everything, but it would be helpful. The Alitos. Clearly, he is a very strict religionist in his own warped way, and clearly she is a crazy one, in her own crazy way. And they, in one way, and Justice Thomas and his wife, they're a great bridge group. But the whole of the last 3 or 4 justices have been just disaster, and clearly that's a Leonard Leo list. He was the one who's seated in all the right seats to recommend whomever he wants. So the blatancy, it seems to me they're getting more blatant and more, okay, I don't care. I'll just say. They're saying the things that you don't say out loud, and they're saying them out loud.
Right. Listen, a long decades ago, Leonard Leo recognized that a lot of the policies he wanted for America were deeply unpopular. But he knew that if you can take over the court, you can impose these unpopular views on society.
That's why they invented abortion, isn't it? You have a whole chapter on it. Yeah, tell about that.
I mean, yes, I would be very happy to talk about that. And I also want to talk about the right-wing legal movement. I want to do that first.
Yes, okay.
You've been talking about Alito, and you've been talking about Leo and Thomas. I mean, the right-wing legal movement, which ties into the abortion issue, it really got its start in the early 1980s when movement leaders began to raise investment in these legal advocacy organizations. Now, at that time, I mean, these two issues really flow together. At that time, there was a rise of a movement called the New Right. You're talking about people like Paul Weyrich, Phyllis Schlafly, Howard Phillips. They were very unhappy about the direction of the Republican Party. They thought it was too soft on communism. They felt like the culture was going in the wrong direction. They were upset about liberalization. They were upset about, advances in civil rights and women's rights and gay rights. They were very upset about, the fact that the IRS was starting to look at segregated religious schools and was thinking about revoking their tax privileges. And so they started a movement called the New Right. They sort of needed an issue to unite their new movement. And they went through a number of issues, and eventually they kind of settled on abortion because they knew very well if you can get people to vote on a single issue, you can control their vote. So if we could get everybody to vote on abortion and create a sort of anti-abortion movement, we could get the conservative Catholics, the conservative Protestants, and even fundamentalist Christians. Now, at that time, most Protestant Republicans supported abortion rights, right? Let's think about Betty Ford, who hailed Roe versus Wade as a great, great decision. Southern Baptist Convention issued statements in 1971 and 74 supporting abortion rights liberalization. You had Barry Goldwater, conservative hero, who supported abortion law liberalization, at least early in his career. His wife, Peggy, co-founded Planned Parenthood in Arizona, if you can believe it. Yeah. But, they really needed to purge these pro-choice voices from the Republican Party. And this sort of coincides to some degree with the formation of the right-wing legal movement, where leaders began to sort of raise investment in these legal advocacy organizations because they too recognized the key to bring about this cultural change. How are we going to change the direction of the cruise ship? We're going to do it through the courts. So, there are several early decisions that contributed to the start of the movement, including, by the way, Brown versus Board of Ed in '54, and the subsequent right-wing reaction to school desegregation. Yeah. But the courts didn't really line up to restructure, that movement didn't line up to restructure the courts until, I say, the early 1980s to early 1990s. Mm-hmm. And in that period, you had the formation of groups like the Federalist Society in '82, the American Center for Law and Justice in 1990. By the early 1990s, you had the creation of the Alliance Defending Freedom. It used to be called the Alliance Defense Fund. That was in '94. Now they have an annual budget of over $100 million a year. And they, along with other right-wing groups like Beckett, Liberty Counsel, and other groups, they basically comprise today an extraordinarily well-funded right-wing movement that is set on commandeering the courts and using it to impose these unpopular policies. So the New Right and the formation of the right-wing legal movement is, these two things happened, and that's not accidental. Listen, this movement is very strategic. It's very patient, very long range in its thinking. And from the beginning, it really set out picking the right cases to bring to the right courts. So they're creating these novel legal building blocks that would sideline the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, the first clause of the First Amendment, which is meant to separate church and state. Yeah. And they basically turned civil rights law on its head. And so now a lot of the decisions that we're getting in today's Supreme Court, which are, anti-reproductive rights, they're going to go after Obergefell. They're going to, of course, they're, getting rid of whatever guardrails on guns that they can, and all these other kinds of policies that are deeply unpopular with most Americans. They're a consequence of these decades of investment in that right-wing legal sphere.
They just bided their time. And you see, the problem with our side, as it were, is that people in general, where elections are concerned, vote the top of the ticket. That's exciting. That's glamorous. That's, newsworthy. And so, but we don't vote local. We don't vote that much local. The funny thing is, and down ticket.
I go to a lot of these right-wing gatherings, and at a lot of them,
I don't know how you bear it.
The leaders will say, this election is about judges, judges, judges. I mean, when you're considering who to vote for, it's really important to consider which judges they're going to appoint to the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but also the federal courts. And if you can get the courts, you can get the country. And,
of course.
that's one of the reasons that a lot of folks who were frankly on the fence in 2016, a lot of religious right leaders would have preferred Ted Cruz. It was very clear attending their gatherings. I remember there were a couple of leaders of organizations who couldn't even say Trump's name. They were clearly repelled by him, but they got behind him because they knew he'd give them the justices that they wanted. And they'd give him unprecedented power and political access to public money. And, at every event, I've gone to March for Life every year. I'd go to, Pray Vote Stand, these different events. And anytime Trump shows up, he often does, he'll say, I think I gave you everything you wanted. And you know what? I think I gave you more. He's saying, I did what you told me to do, and I actually did a little more. And that's why they're behind him. They're all behind him in spite of the rape, in spite of the, whatever.
His atrocious life.
Yeah. And then I've heard a lot of them justified. They say, we don't need a savior. We have a savior in Jesus Christ. We need a leader.
Yeah.
And there's something authoritarian about this movement. It's a movement that
very much so.
Says America is an apocalyptic struggle between absolute good and absolute evil. The consequences of loss are too dire to ignore, and we need a bad guy who's going to crack heads as long as guy is willing to break the rules, and as long as
look at all the people he admires. The people he admires, is every tyrant you can come up with, from the left or the right. It doesn't matter to him anymore. But he knows his people. How do you do it? How do you do it, Katherine? How do you? Just step aside for a moment as a human being. You are amazing. How do you?
Well, I trained as an investigative journalist. I was so lucky earlier in my career to be taken under the wing of a fellow named Wayne Barrett. He was an investigative reporter at the Village Voice many years ago. He wrote the first biography of Donald Trump. He was researching that book when I was working for him. So, I was very shy. I was extremely young. I was terrified. And he taught me to follow the money. He said, go into the room where there's a guy and ask the guy with the most light on him the one question he doesn't want to be asked. And I was scared. I was terrified, but I did it. I did it anyway. And sometimes he'd be like, "Okay, go up to this warehouse in the Bronx and find me this one piece of paper." And I had to go up there and find a needle in a haystack. And I was, it's a really impossible task. But I was also scared of Wayne, so I just figured out how to do it.
My God.
So, I feel like, I think that I think our democracy is really at stake. Our future, our rights are at stake.
I agree.
And,
I agree.
And so I think this is, you can't understand what's happening in American politics today without understanding this movement and its people. And that's why I've been covering this movement for the past 15 years.
My God, but for it to be your basic focus is both perilous and courageous. That's incredible. And daily risking being dispirited, which is something that
I don't get dispirited at all. I think that if one
talk
is
about that,
working hard to expose this movement, to if one is living in the solution, one does not become dispirited. Hope is in the struggle. I think about how so many people around the world have experienced much worse conditions than we have,
True.
where our democracy is still intact, where it's there for us if we care to fight for it. And I think we have responsibility to do so, not just for ourselves, but for future generations.
Well, I think you're right. I just periodically, it's sort of like in broadcast news, that wonderful movie with Holly Hunter, where she weeps for 15 minutes every alternating Thursday, because and then she pulls it together and goes on. And I do I've done that for quite some time now. Not necessarily every alternating Thursday, but it's difficult to be have given a great large chunk portions of one's life to to not only this movement but to social justice causes, and then to see that they're still there. The bastards are still coming up. You close the doors, they come in the windows. And
they want us to feel dispirited. I mean,
yes,
that's the
right.
thing. If you feel dispirited and you feel apathetic, then they have won. And it's very interesting because you've probably seen this in the book, The Power Shippers. But they have one of these data specialists said we have 200 million voter files. Voter profiles in our files. We know it makes people turn out to vote one way, and we know what makes them stay home. So that what they often do is, like in advance of an election, they'll push stuff into people's social media feeds intended to make them vote a certain way, or
just
not vote
depressed
at all.
And exactly.
Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, nobody's good. Don't vote for anybody. Oh, look at this third party person, they're the ones who have the answer, you should go for them. Oh, look how bad this the Democratic front runner is, look what dumb thing he said back in 27 or something." And what they're really trying to do is promote voter disengagement for anyone who disagrees with the politics of conquest and division.
They're still back there not wanting people to vote.
Yes, this is a war. There's an information war happening alongside everything else. We have to be really cognizant of that, especially when we're online and engaging with sort of content online that seems incendiary or explosive. We really need to, take a step back and sometimes say, what is this message really telling me? Is this promoting apathy and voter disengagement? And if it does, who does that really serve?
Who does it benefit precisely? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is one of the reasons why Gloria and Jane and I founded the Women's Media Center, because because we're feminists, but also at its very basic iteration, it is a pro-democracy movement. It is, this is for journalists, period. And we wanted to raise the profile of women journalists because that doesn't get raised, unfortunately, nearly enough. Not only in terms of sex, but in terms of race and in terms of ethnicity and in terms of ability and all the other aspects. And it's been a very interesting fight because the people you think sometimes are your friends are not. And well, I want
to hear more about that.
That sounds familiar. And well, I'm still reeling from the Washington Post revelations this last week. I mean, that's just so, boy, talk about depressing. So the press has had its own griefs, but it hasn't done what we expected to do. The emphasis on polls, for example, has been very, very heavy, without the criticism of polls, without, so a book like yours or thinking like yours comes in at such a high level. I don't mean of intellectual preciousness, because it's extremely good, excellent, clean, strong, sturdy English. But and you're a damn good writer. But a book that comes in at the intelligent complexity of yours and requires people to think, is a challenge for many people. And because we've let our levels of education, as you know from the other book, slide. And I don't know. I mean, I always think that rather than get depressed, even if it's all over and done with and there's nothing we can do about it, this is a good way to go, because at least you're going fighting, by God, and that's a bonny way to go. But I don't think that this is the end. I think that we can turn this around, and we will turn it around. It's just damn hard because those bastards keep coming back at us.
Well, the thing to take some comfort in is that there are more of us who reject the politics of conquest and division than there are those who endorse them. They just win elections only by getting out their people in disproportionate numbers because, as you know, the Christian nationalist movement, much of it functions as a giant voter turnout machine. So I used to think of it as like, it's like a +1 problem. You remember when you were when you were young and you would go to night clubs and you had your +1, you have your friends with you.
Right.
We all need to bring our +1s and +2s and +5s to the polls with us. We have to talk about the issues that matter, reach out to people who seem disenfranchised and tell them why their votes matter, not just at the top of the ticket, but down the ballot as well. We need to get involved in local politics because the movement is very good at getting their people. We all saw the Moms for Liberty, attacking, books and libraries that don't exist and stuff like that. We and this fake CRT saying, they're teaching CRT in 5th grade, which nobody's teaching CRT in a public elementary school. But they were, these sort of moral panics, getting people involved in these moral panics to get them engaged in local politics. So we have to get engaged in local politics too. And we have to remember that this is a movement that as women we cannot take our rights for granted. Just look around the world and think about how lucky we are as Americans to have certain basic rights, and they're trying to take them away. As you know, I mean, the loss of abortion rights has consequences on all women. I mean, you can't take away the rights of pregnant women without taking away the rights of all girls and women, because you're marking out half the population as being members of a lower caste.
That's right.
Whose bodies are a property of the state. You're designating that half of humanity for a distinct and subservient role. And this has knock-on effects in every aspect of society. It shows up in lower pay, in wide-scale workplace discrimination, in media and cultural depictions of women as subordinate. So, when you have a subclass of women with no control of the most fundamental freedoms, and their families, also taking away the freedoms of their families and their partners, it really impacts how all women are perceived and treated. So we really have to treasure the rights that we do have and work and fight to keep them and fight to expand them when possible.
Oh, Katherine, you are a jewel.
Well, thank you. How are you? And thank you so much for this wonderful interview. I'm really grateful to you for reaching out to me today.
What is the new book coming out next year? Because we must have you back.
A new book is coming out in February 2025. The title is Money, Lies, and God: Inside the Movement to Dismantle American Democracy.
Wow.
To some degree, it takes off where Power Worshippers left off. I finished writing Power Worshippers in 2019, and a lot has happened since then. And I really get into this sort of information war, the spread of disinformation and conspiracism, religious nationalism, of course. And then I write about a movement called the New Right, which is less sort of religion-based, even though many of its leaders work with religious right leaders. There's a kind of synergy there. But there's also, it's more explicitly anti-democratic. So I write about all those things. And as with Power Worshippers, it's a combination of on-the-ground reporting and political analysis. And I really look forward to coming back and talking about it with you.
Well, you will. I mean, but at some point they're going to wake up to the fact that you're on the loose and writing. I mean, so we better get you a red curly wig and a bodyguard or something like that.
I would never. I don't lie, and I don't use disguises. So
I know you don't, but they don't know that. So I think the work that you're doing is of extraordinary importance. It is just brilliant
Thank
work.
you so much.
And I'm deeply personally grateful for it. And definitely, boy, wow, will we ever have you back.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was certainly bracing. And I'll be back in just a moment with some fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Surprised by reality. Those are fighting words. There I was, all primed to write about the baby robin in my garden, and how it would be learning to fly the way one did last year, pooping merrily on every piece of furniture as it went, squealing and bonking into branches, and landing in the bird bath in wet fury once it left the nest. But, you see, the best laid plans. The baby robin did indeed come to the edge of the nest and stand there poised, calling for Mama and Papa help. At least bring food if you can't teach me how to fly. And then, an hour or so later, it was gone. It had a speckled breast, not yet a red one, and so there was no real telling its sex, and it remains forever now an it, the baby robin. But we did see it fall, or leap, or jump onto a soft landing of greenery and soil. And a bit later, when I came out back and it saw me, that sent it scurrying under some shelving in the garden. The parents weren't afraid. But it was a baby robin. Green everywhere and hundreds of plants, and it finds shelving for shelter under a board. Oh, children. And I can hear now from the neighbor's garden the familiar squawks and bonks from last year's display, so I think that's where it's being trained in flight. I can't witness it, though, and I confess I'm disappointed. But that is part of joy, too. And if it's as much of a surprise, we better get used to it, because there tends to be more disappointment than joy in life, and that at least means, yeah, it does mean, that there was something magical, and its absence leaves us crestfallen. And that's our show for this week. Next week is our last show of the season, and then we'll be on hiatus until September. But we will return then, blazing fire and ready in an election year. Damn right. You can follow me on social media at The Robin Morgan. You can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, and you can find my new novel, Parallax, and my just-out new book of poems, Harvesting Darkness, wherever books are sold. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Views expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer, as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer for this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us next time on Women's Media Center Live.